I think it's good we start with Surah Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Malik Yawm al-Din. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين صدق الله العلي العظيم. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعن الله ولا أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين آمين يا رب العالمين. أما بعد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So this is the 23rd part of our ongoing series, The Art of Supplication, which is an exploration into the sacred relationship between the supplicant, the supplication, and the divine. The insights within this series are cumulative, and the nature of our discussion really does require that each part build upon foundations laid in the ones that came before. Therefore, to prevent any misunderstanding and to fully benefit from the depth of this subject, it is essential that everyone engage with the previous parts, ideally in order, prior to continuing with this one. Nevertheless, we will have a short recap. If I can get a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So in our second session of this sub-series, the previous session of this sub-series titled The Heart of the Matter, we move from the foundation of purity to the axis of supplication, certainty or yaqeen, the substance that fills the purified vessel of the heart. Our exploration unfolded in three clear movements. Firstly, the intellectual foundation of yaqeen, or certainty. We first established that yaqeen is not a blind inherited dogma, but a profound intellectual achievement. Following Imam Ali's definition, we explored its four pillars: insightful discernment, the interpretation of wisdom, admonition born of reflection, and following the established way of those who came before. Our lesson was to graduate from this faith of inheritance to a faith of investigation, always seeking the guidance of a righteous scholar. And our call to clarify was to reject the brittle, fearful dogma of the takfiris for the robust, confident, and intellectual certainty of Ahlulbayt. The second point was the internal state of yaqeen. We explored what yaqeen feels like. We learnt from Imam As-Sadiq that it is faith in its entirety. Following Imam Khomeini, we understood it as a state of vision, the fruits of polishing the heart with dhikr, where unseen realities become brighter than the sun. This culminated in Ayatollah Fadlullah's profound insight that yaqeen transforms dua or supplication from being a request to a dialogue. Our lesson was to use dhikr not as a tally, but as the act of polishing the heart's mirror, to resist the modern age of heedlessness or ghifla. And our call to clarify was to proclaim that dhikr and the yaqeen that results from it are in fact radical acts of resistance. And the third point was yaqeen as the weapon of resistance. Finally, we witnessed yaqeen in action under pressure. We learned from Imam Sajdah in Dua Abu Hamza al-Thumali that our certainty is not in our deeds, but rather in God's mercy. We identified Satan's primary tactic, using our sins to make us despair, as taught by Imam Khomeini, and the weapon to defeat it, which was the hadith from Imam As-Sadiq that God's mercy erases the sin from the memory of the angels and the earth. And this linked directly to Surah Al-Asr, where yaqeen is the engine of sabr, or steadfastness, embodied in the contemporary quotes of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, may God rest his pure soul, regarding inevitable destiny, and of Hajj Qasim Sulaimani, where he said, "We are fed by certainty, not by salary." Our lesson was that certainty is in mercy, not in deeds. This was a practical lesson that gave us ammunition in dealing with the incessant and insidious whispers of Satan. We called to cultivate a certainty that is based on his attributes and not upon our states. Our call to clarify was that in a world of geopolitics, oppression, and war, the primary weapon of the oppressor is not the bomb or the missile. Rather, it is despair. That from the teachings of the Quran and the leaders, we must understand and clarify that sabr, or steadfastness, forbearance, patience, resistance, is not a grim and passive endurance. Rather, it is a joyful, offensive, and confident resistance that is born of an unshakable yaqeen. We concluded with our supplication, a whisper for the light of certainty, ready to explore the final prerequisite that fuels this entire spiritual state. In His most beautiful name, we proceed. Please give me a salawat. We move on to the third and final part of the heart of the matter, which is the fuel for the heart, Rizq Halal.
اللهم صل على محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعن
So in our journey through the heart of the matter, we've laid the essential foundations for a supplication that can ascend to the divine. In the first part, we began with the prerequisites of purity, tazkiyah, and humility, khushu'. We learnt that the garments we must purify are not just our clothes, but our very selves, our nafs. We discovered that this purity is validated only by a pure heart, qalb tahir, and that this state of humility is the natural result of realizing our own ontological poverty or faqr. We understood, in essence, how to purify the vessel. In the second part, we filled that pure vessel with the light of certainty or yaqeen. We learnt that yaqeen is not a blind inherited dogma, but a profound intellectual achievement built on the four pillars as defined by Imam Ali, peace and blessings be upon him. We saw how this certainty, born of dhikr, remembrance, transforms our prayer from a request to a dialogue, and how it becomes the unshakable axis of our soul and the proactive weapon of our resistance against both the inner despair and outer tyranny. But a pure vessel and a bright light are not static achievements. They are living states that must be actively sustained day after day after day, moment after moment. A polished mirror can be retarnished. A burning light can be dimmed. This brings us to the third and final prerequisite of our series. It is the most practical, the most immediate, and perhaps the most challenging of all. We must now discuss the fuel for the heart. This fuel is Rizq Halal, lawful and pure sustenance. In this session, we will discover that rizq or sustenance is one of the most profound and misunderstood concepts in Islam. We will expand our definition of it far beyond the plate of food on our table. And we will find that our rizq is everything that we consume, the food we eat, the money we earn, the images we see, the words we hear, and most critically, the knowledge we take and the leadership we follow. This is the part of the journey where our inner purity from part 1 and our inner certainty from part 2 are put to the ultimate test. This is where our heart of the matter meets the world. Please give me a salawat. We move to the first point, which is the spectrum of sustenance from morsels to imams.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
So the core concept, redefining rizq. We first begin by shattering the limited definition of rizq. In the Quran, the command for pure sustenance is foundational, and it is almost always linked to righteous action. In a key verse addressed to all messengers, God sets the divine formula. He says, in Quran, Surah Al-Mu'minun, the chapter of the believers, 23rd chapter of the Quran, verse 51, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, O messengers, eat of the good or pure things and act righteously. The rabbit hole here is the order of the command. The command to eat of all the good, pure, lawful things comes before the command to act righteously. This precedence is not accidental. In Tafsir al-Mizan, Allama Tabatabai explains this direct causal link. He says, and in the precedence of eating the good, pure things over righteous action, there is an indication, what we call an ishara, that righteous action is dependent upon being nourished by the good, pure things. For food exerts a manifest effect on the human soul and predisposes it towards works that correspond to its nature. And the references are in the write-up. This is why the Quran repeatedly pairs eating with righteousness, not as separate commands, but as a cause followed by an effect. What enters us becomes us. The one who consumes oppression becomes an oppressor. The one who consumes mercy becomes merciful. A corrupt intake cannot produce a pure outcome. But what is this intake? What are these, what we call tayyibat? Our definition of rizq or sustenance must be expanded. Allama Tabatabai again in his commentary on this verse, which is from Surah Al-Imran, the chapter of the family of Imran, third chapter of the Quran, verse 27, which reads, "You give sustenance to whom you will without account." Allama Tabatabai in his commentary of this verse writes, "And rizq or sustenance is more general than the material such as food, drink, and clothing, and the non-material such as knowledge, such as ilm, guidance, hidayah, and true gnosis. All of that is provision from God, exalted is He, which He allots to whom He wills and withholds from who He wills." And this verse clarifies that rizq is any bestowal from God, not just food. Therefore, all the tayyibat, all the good things, are all pure provisions, whether they are physical, such as pure food, intellectual, such as pure knowledge. And the Ahlulbayt made this explicit. They provided the ultimate interpretation of sustenance or rizq in a hadith that reframes our entire understanding of knowledge. When Imam As-Sadiq was asked about the verse from Surah Abasa, the chapter of the one who frowned, 80th chapter of the Quran, verse 24, which reads, "Let humanity, let man look at his food." The narrator of the hadith asked Imam As-Sadiq, saying, "What is his food?" The Imam replied, "His knowledge which he takes and from whom he takes it." And of course the references are in the write-up. But this is our foundation. Rizq is a spectrum. At one end there is physical food, wealth, this sort of stuff, physical sustenance. At the other there is intellectual and spiritual sustenance, knowledge and mentors. And just as there are two kinds of sustenance, the Quran teaches us that there are two ultimate sources for that sustenance. These are the Imams we choose to follow. Let's now have a look at these sources. Firstly, the source for Rizq Halal. The Quran in Surah As-Sajdah, the chapter of the prostration, explains how divine leadership is created. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, in Surah As-Sajdah, chapter of the prostration, 32nd chapter of the Quran, verse 24. He says, "And we made from among them leaders, Imams, who guide by our command, when they were steadfast and had certainty in our signs." Notice the prerequisites over here, sabr, or steadfastness, and yaqeen, certainty, which was our topic from the previous session. These are the Imams of guidance. Let's now look at the source of haram rizq. Again, in Quran, Surah Al-Qasas, the chapter of the narrations, shows us the opposite. In Quran, Surah Al-Qasas, chapter of the narrations, 28th chapter of the Quran, verse 41, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "And we made them leaders, Imams, who invite to the fire, and on the day of resurrection, they will not be helped." This is the synthesis. The most critical choice we make is not just what we eat, but which leader or imam we take our sustenance from. Every day we are consuming either guidance or fire. Let's now look at the inward lesson, auditing our total consumption. The practical lesson from this is that we must become meticulous auditors of all of our consumption. We must apply the poison analogy. Just as haram or unlawful food makes the body sick, haram ideas make the soul sick. What we consume becomes us. And our audit must have two parts. Firstly, we must audit our physical and financial sustenance. We must ask, is my physical sustenance tayyib, or good, pure? This is not just about a halal stamp on meat or something like this. It is about the source of the wealth that brought it. As the great jurist, including, for example, Sayyid Sistani, Ayatollah Sistani, guide us in their legal edicts, a transaction becomes haram, unlawful, not just from the item, like, for example, pork, but from the method. His ruling forbids numerous types of transactions, which include, but are not limited to, and I quote from Said Sistani from Minhaj Salihin, the reference is in the write-up. He says, such as deception or fraud, and giving short measure in scales, and taking wages for a job one does not fulfill, and oppression, such as usurpation. This is precisely what is meant by oppression, deception, and negligence in the rights of others. We must ask, is my salary truly halal? Am I giving a full day's work for my pay? Is my business practice not just committing fraud or oppression? Am I exploiting anyone in my supply chain? When we scroll through social media, are we eating from accounts that increase our yaqeen or certainty, or accounts that increase our anxiety? When we binge watch, are we consuming content that makes us more human or more numb? This is the modern battlefield of rizq, not just what enters our mouths, but what enters our consciousness even through our screens. And secondly, we must audit our intellectual and spiritual sustenance. This is the more dangerous modern day poison. We must ask, is the food I consume from my screen tayyib? Is it good? Is the media I watch planting seeds of despair and heedlessness or ghifla, or is it planting yaqeen or certainty? Is the scholar I follow an imam of guidance, leading me to humility, or an imam of fire, leading me to arrogance, ujub, and division? We must also reframe gluttony. It is not just the overeating of food. It is about the mindless overconsumption of all things. Toxic social media, useless news, the endless pursuit of wealth, all of which are forms of rizq haram that poison the heart. Now for our outward call, challenging the normalization of poison. The modern world has normalized both kinds of poisonous sustenance. It completely separates our economic lives from our intellectual lives, from our spiritual lives. Let's look at the financial poison. Our call to clarify is to reject the normalization of a billionaire coexisting with a starving neighbor. This is a society built on rizq haram. We must challenge the hypocrisy, connecting it back to the first part of this series, a challenge that builds its mosque, a community rather, that builds its mosque or religious center with riba or interest-laden money or funds from known exploitation, has a pure garment on a filthy foundation. Here we must be precise. We live in a world where the entire global economic system is interest-laden. Our great jurists, from Ayatollah Sistani to Imam Khamenei to Sayyid al-Khoyi, etc., have issued rulings that permit certain interactions, for example, mortgages for a home and such things, under the specific conditions of compulsion or necessity, as a way to navigate this reality. Here we must be precise. We must be very precise. We have rulings that permit certain interactions. But this is not everything. Let's look at these rulings, for example. When Ayatollah Sistani is asked about taking loans from non-Muslim banks, his ruling clarifies a specific legal channel. He says, it is permissible to take a loan from a non-Muslim bank, whether private or otherwise, not with the intention of borrowing, but with the intention of taking possession of a property of an unknown owner, with the permission of the religious ruler. Similarly, Imam Khamenei, when asked about this issue, frames it through the lens of what we call darura, or necessity. The question was asked, is it permissible to take a housing loan that contains riba or interest in a foreign country? So Imam Khamenei says, taking an interest-based loan is not permissible unless necessity dictates it. But this permission that we have must be understood in its true spiritual Islamic context. It is a concession born of our weakness. It is not an endorsement of the system. It is a spiritual equivalent of being permitted to eat carrion or meta, a dead animal that you find in the street, in order to avoid starvation. You do it to survive, but you feel the impurity of it and you strive with all of your might to find halal food, to become complacent with this permission, to see it as a green light, to build our sacred spaces or anything without a second thought, this is a complete failure and a spiritual failure. It is a failure of yaqeen, a failure to trust in God's barakah or blessings. Therefore, this permission of necessity must not be an end to the discussion, but rather the beginning of our creative struggle. It must be the impetus that forces us to be more imaginative. God has given us the rizq of imagination to find solutions to the rizq haram we are forced into, for example. This is the true jihad of the community. And this falls within the whole jihad of clarification, to pioneer our own systems that mitigate this reliance, such as, for example, reviving the sunnah of direct community funding or waqf, exploring community-based credit unions, and researching new decentralized financial models that are free from the poison of riba, perhaps even crypto. This is the very definition of sabr, not a passive waiting, but an active, creative struggle in order to enjoin the truth. This is why the resistance movement's economic creativity, from Yemen's self-sufficiency despite the blockade, to Gaza's tunnel economy, to Iran's sanction resistance, this isn't just political strategy. This is spiritual jihad against the poisonous global system. These communities prove that barakah or blessings can be sustained when abundance, in inverted commas, has been cut off. Then you have the intellectual poison. We must also challenge the Imams of fire within our midst. When a community invites a speaker, online or in person, who preaches takfir, basically calling others to be infidels, looking down on others, being offensive in this way, someone who is unqualified, who lies and distorts Islamic concepts, who exhibits arrogance and or promotes division, that community is knowingly feeding its people spiritual poison. This is just as dangerous, if not more so, than serving impure food at a gathering. But the most dangerous Imams of fire are not just rogue speakers. They are, quote, the leaders of nations. And the Quran also warns us of the Imams of disbelief. In the Quran, Surah Tawbah, the chapter of the repentance, 9th chapter of the Quran, verse number 12, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "But if they violate their oaths after their pledge and attack your religion, then fight the Imams of disbelief. They have no faith, so that they may desist." This is not ancient history. This is our daily geopolitical reality. A leader who enables or commits genocide, who starves an entire population, or who builds his political power on systemic lies, is a modern Imam of fire, Imam of disbelief. The media outlets and state-sponsored propaganda machines that whitewash his crimes are distributing his poisonous rizq on an industrial scale. They are force-feeding the nafs, or the souls of the population, with falsehood, with arrogance, and with the dehumanization of others. This is the terrifying synthesis. When a population passively consumes this propaganda, when they just follow their genocidal leader out of nationalism, apathy, or fear, they become complicit in his evil. They are sustaining themselves on haram rizq. Their tax money, their silence, their vote, it all becomes food from the fire. And our final synthesis in this point is this. A halal label on our food is a spiritual deception if the money that bought it was haram, or if the ideology we consume while eating it is haram. We must purify the entire chain. Please give me a salawat and we move to the second point, which is the anatomy of corruption, the blocked heart, and riba.
اللهم صل على محمد.
So first, let's look at the core concept, the spiritual consequence. In our first point, we established that haram rizq, unlawful substance, is not just a disobedient act, it is the consumption of poison. That poison, whether it is an impure morsel or an impure idea from an imam of fire, has a direct, tangible and devastating spiritual consequence. It is not just a sin we commit. It is a corrupting agent that we absorb until it becomes part of us, actively blocking our connection to the divine. Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him and his family, gave us the most terrifying warning about this. He described a man on a long journey, disheveled and covered in dust, who raised his hands to the sky crying, "O Lord, O Lord." The perfect picture of a desperate supplicant, and yet the Prophet states his plea is doomed. Why? Let's have a look at the entire hadith. The Prophet Muhammad said, "O people, God is pure and accepts only what is pure. And indeed, God has commanded the believers with what he commanded his messengers, saying, O messengers, eat of the good things and act righteously. And saying, O you who believe, eat of the good things we have provided for you." Then he mentioned a man who, having journeyed long, disheveled and dusty, stretches his hand to the sky saying, "O Lord, O Lord." Yet his food is unlawful, his drink is unlawful, his clothing is unlawful, and he has been nourished with the unlawful. So how can he be answered? And this is actually a hadith that is found in the books of our brothers of the Sunnah, in Sahih Muslim, as well as in the Shia books in Bihar al-Anwar. And the references, you can find them in detail on the write-up. Now the key word here is found in our traditions is that he was nourished by it. The haram was not a single mistake. It has become his flesh and blood. It is a contamination of the vessel itself. A heart that is, as we learnt in the first part, meant to be pure or tahir, is now physically corrupted by this haram fuel. This is why the Imams warned that a single morsel of haram has a specific corrosive effect on our worship. Imam As-Sadiq taught us, whoever eats a single morsel of the unlawful, of haram, no prayer will be accepted for him for 40 nights, from him for 40 nights, and no supplication will be answered for 40 days. And every flesh that is grown from the unlawful, the fire is more deserving of it. This is not an arbitrary punishment. It is a spiritual law. It is the spiritual half-life of a poison. It takes that long for the soul to process and purge the deep contamination caused by a single act of that consumption. The great jurist and Gnostic, Ayatollah al-Khoi, may God rest his pure soul, articulated this principle perfectly. He explained that impure substance directly extinguishes the light of the intellect and the heart. He said, indeed, the light of understanding, what we call Nur al-Fahm, is extinguished by unlawful morsels, al-Luqmat al-Haram. And the reference is in the write-up. And this is the same sentiment that has been expressed by Ayatollah Jawadi Amali, Ayatollah Bahjat, and it's also been cited in Misbah al-Sharia, attributed to Imam As-Sadiq. This is the spiritual equation. You cannot purify your heart and build certainty if you are ingesting impurity. The Rizq Haram extinguishes the yaqeen. So let's now have a look at our inward lesson, the poison of riba or usury. If Rizq Haram in general is a poison, our inward lesson must be to dissect and understand its most potent, concentrated and spiritually corrosive form, riba, usury or interest. The Quran does not treat riba like any other sin. It is the only sin in the entire Quran that is singled out as a direct and explicit declaration of war against God and His Prophet. In Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter of the cow, second chapter of the Quran, verse 279, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "And if you do not desist from usury, then be notified of a war from God and His Messenger." This should shake us to our core. But we must ask why. Why is this financial transaction, which the modern world considers normal, treated with a severity greater than almost any other sin? The Ahlulbayt explained that its severity is due to its profound spiritual impact. It is not a sin of passion or a momentary lapse. It is a cold, calculated and systemic corruption of the soul. Imam As-Sadiq, peace and blessings be upon him, gave us a terrifying scale to understand its true weight. Imam al-Sadiq says, a single dirham or coin of riba, usury, is worse in the sight of God than 70 fornications, all of them with one's own mother in the sacred house of God, the Kaaba. This shocking, visceral analogy is meant to awaken us. As scholars like Imam Khomeini, may God rest his pure soul, have explained, this is because the riba is the antithesis of sadaqah, of charity. In his commentary, he explains that riba is not just a flawed transaction. It is a spiritual state rooted in a deep attachment to the world, which is the very opposite of the detachment and empathy required for real sadaqah or real charity. He identifies this attachment as the root of all corruption. Imam Khomeini says, all ethical and practical corruptions that are found in humanity stem from this very love of the world and of heedlessness of God and the hereafter. And this riba devouring emerges from the same fountainhead. And this is from Imam Khomeini's tafsir on Surah Al-Fatiha. You can find the references in the writer. Charity is the act of giving from one's attachment to the world. Therefore, it purifies the soul. Riba, therefore, is its dark opposite, the act of deepening one's attachment by parasitically taking from another's need. It is the mindset of pure systemic greed. It is the practical economic expression of the Imams of fire. Moreover, when someone takes riba or usury or interest, they are not just poisoning themselves, but becoming a poisoner of others, perpetuating the system, normalizing the exploitation, and spreading the spiritual disease through the entire economic body of the ummah and of the world. Our inward lesson is therefore to stop all rationalization on this subject. We must see riba not as a financial instrument or tool or a necessary evil, but as the spiritual poison that it is. We must meticulously audit ourselves, our bank accounts, our mortgages, our investments, our credit cards, and so on. To consume it knowingly and complacently, outside the absolute points of darura or necessity that we discussed earlier, is willing to be nourished by the unlawful. It is to choose us to be in a state of war with God and his messenger, and then wonder, as the Prophet asked in the hadith we mentioned earlier, how can we be answered? How can this man be answered? Let's now look at our outward call, the prophetic rejection of parasitic wealth. The absolute rejection of parasitic wealth is not a minor point of jurisprudence. It is a core prophetic teaching essential for social justice. It is not unique to Islam. It is the sunnah of all true prophets of God. The most famous and dramatic example of this comes from the life of Prophet Jesus, peace and blessings be upon him. When he entered the temple in Jerusalem, Al-Quds, the sacred house of God, he did not just preach, he performed a radical act of tahara, of purification, not with water, but with a whip. In the New Testament, the Gospel of Matthew, and also in the Gospel of Mark, we find, and Jesus entered the temple and drove out all those who were selling and buying in the temple, and he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. And he said to them, it is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you make it a den of thieves. And the reference to this is in the write-up. Let us be precise. His anger was not directed at simple trade. It was aimed squarely at the money changers and interest takers who were exploiting the poor pilgrims, forcing them to exchange their impure Roman coins for pure temple currency at usurious and exorbitant rates. They were the Imams of fire who had set up their tables at the very heart of the sanctuary. They had turned a house of prayer into a den of thieves. This is the link to our modern world. The great martyr, philosopher, and economist, Shaykh Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr, may God rest his pure soul, in his masterpiece, Iqtisaduna, Our Economics, dissected the anatomy of this war. He explained why riba is systemic poison. He defines it as a foundational act of exploitation, a gain that has no corresponding countervalue in labor or risk, which is what separates it from all legitimate trade. His analysis of usurious loans, he defines riba as, in his analysis of usurious loans, he defines riba as the taking of an increase on the principal which he loans, without this increase being met by any labor or other counter value. It is an exploitation of the borrower's need and the taking of wealth without a true equivalent. And the reference, of course, is in the write-up. This is the core of the war. As Shahid al-Sadr explains, this system of taking without true equivalent is what causes social collapse. It is a systemic poison because, number one, it concentrates wealth in the hands of a few, the lenders, without them performing any real work or creating any real new value. Number two, it disincentivizes real labor and productive investment. Why risk building, a business? Why risk building a business when you can get guaranteed profit from an interest-based loan? And number three, it creates a parasitic class that feeds on the needs of the poor, leading directly to the billionaire stroke starving neighbor scenario we spoke of right at the beginning. This is the system of haram rizq. The Imams of fire, our corrupt global leaders, feed their societies on usury, on riba, to keep them spiritually sick, indebted, and compliant. Our outward call is to follow the sunnah of Prophet Isa, to identify this corruption, to name it, and to have the courage to overturn its tables, first in our own hearts and lives, and then in our communities, and then across the wider world. Please give me a loud salawat, and we move to the third point, which is the ultimate resistance, becoming an imam of guidance. So firstly, the core concept, the economy of yaqeen. We've now arrived at the final, practical, and most challenging synthesis of our entire series. We have purified the vessel. We have filled it with light. We have defined the spectrum of fuel from morsels to imams and identified its most potent poison, riba and the imams of fire. Now we face a choice. This choice is the ultimate daily test of our certainty, our yaqeen. Why is this our test? Why is this a test? Because rizq haram, unlawful sustenance of the imams of fire, often appears much more abundant. The riba-based system promises greater and faster returns. The path of corruption, deception, and exploitation often looks like the easier path to wealth. The path of rizq halal, lawful sustenance, in contrast, often looks like the path of less. It requires patience, hard work, and a refusal to cut corners. Gaza's survival, despite total siege, is the ultimate contemporary proof of this principle, that barakah sustains much more than abundance. A population denied food, water, and medicine, yet still standing, proves that rizq halal, even when scarce, contains a divine multiplication that rizq haram, however abundant, can never possess. This is the ultimate test of faith. Do we choose the illusion of quantity, or do we have yaqeen in the reality of barakah, or divine blessing, and quality divine blessing? Barakah is the unseen, qualitative abundance from God that makes a little halal sustenance go that much further and produce more real benefit than a mountain of haram wealth. The commander of the faithful, Imam Ali, peace and blessings be upon him, laid out this spiritual law, warning us that the path of haram is a deception. Imam Ali says, the unlawful does not grow, and if it appears to grow, there is no blessing in it. The path of haram is a spiritual dead end. It is rizq without barakah. It is sustenance without barakah. Conversely, what is the reward for choosing the halal path, even when it's difficult? The reward is not just pure sustenance, it is serenity of the heart. Allama Majlisi, while quoting Imam Jawad and Imam Ali, comments in Bihar al-Anwar thusly. He says, first of all, he quotes a hadith from Imam Jawad, saying, trust in God is the price of every precious thing and the ladder to every lofty height. Al-Majlisi then quotes Imam Ali, who said, "Trust in God and the purity of the soul through certainty in God lead to serenity within the heart." After quoting these two hadith, Al-Majlisi explains, "Trust in God and certainty in Him necessarily entail contentment and detachment from the world. These bring about halal rizq, or pure sustenance, and blessing within it, and they lead to serenity and stillness of the heart. This being the station of knowledge of certainty, ilm al-yaqeen, the first of the degrees of those who truly possess certitude." And the references are on the right-up. This is the perfect synthesis. Rizq halal, the pure sustenance mentioned in the full hadith, is the proof of our yaqeen, and its result is serenity, the very definition of qalb al-tahir, the pure heart. Choosing barakah over abundance is the practical daily economy of yaqeen. Let's now look at our inward lesson, the true wealth of knowledge. If our core concept is to choose barakah, blessing, over mere quantity, our inward lesson is to completely recalibrate our definition of wealth and sustenance in the first place. We must ask, what is the best form of sustenance, of rizq? Is it that of the world, which is finite and diminishes? Or is it righteous knowledge, ilm, which is a bestowal from God and is, by its very nature, barakah, or a blessing itself? The commander of the faithful, Imam Ali, gave his companion, Kumail ibn Ziyad, a very profound lesson on this matter, elevating knowledge, or ilm, above wealth, al-mal, in every respect. He concludes his comparison with this powerful explanation. Imam Ali says, "Knowledge increases the more it is shared, whereas wealth decreases the more it is spent. O Kumail, love for the scholar is a form of faith by which one draws near to God." And the references are in the write-up. This is the ultimate synthesis. Material wealth, rizq, diminishes when you spend it. Spiritual, intellectual, actual wealth, knowledge, which is a form of rizq, increases when you spend it by teaching it. It is pure barakah. And notice his final line, love for the scholar is a form of faith. This links back directly to our first point, the alim, the true righteous scholar, is the human vessel for this pure rizq. He is the Imam of guidance, who provides the food that increases and gives life to the heart, as opposed to the Imam of fire, who provides the food that corrupts and destroys. Today, these Imams of guidance include not just our righteous, honorable scholars, senior scholars, but the resistance fighters whose steadfastness under fire feeds our certainty more than 1,000 sermons. The father in Gaza who says, Alhamdulillah, all praise be to God, over his martyred child, teaches us more about yaqeen, or certainty, than volumes of philosophy. The practical application? Our inward lesson is to make this choice consciously every single day. This is the true test of our yaqeen, of our certainty. Do we have the yaqeen or certainty to refuse a haram or questionable salary, even if it is larger, trusting that the barakah in the smaller halal salary is our true wealth? And do we have the yaqeen or certainty to refuse to follow a popular but corrupt imam, be it a politician, influencer, or pseudo scholar, who offers us the junk food of rizq haram, ideas that feed our ego, our anger, or our despair? The lesson is to invest our lives, our time, and our energy in seeking the rizq that grows, knowledge, truth, wisdom from the actual imams of guidance and such, and to have the courage to reject the rizq that diminishes and poisons, falsehood, exploitation, and the wealth of riba. Let's now look at our outward call, the socio-economic resistance of Surah Al-Asr. We've now arrived at the final practical and most profound outward call of our entire series. This is the socio-economic dimension of Surah Al-Asr. Surah Al-Asr, of course, being the 103rd chapter of the Quran, 3 verses only, where Allah says, by the passage of time, indeed humanity is in a state of loss, except for those who believe and do righteous deeds and enjoin each other to truth and enjoin each other to patience or steadfastness. We have always asked, how do we enjoin the truth and sabr, patience, in a world dominated by the Imams of fire and their systems of haram rizq? The answer, the divine formula, is given to us in Surah As-Sajdah, the chapter of the prostration, where God explains how the Imams of guidance are created. In Surah As-Sajdah, the chapter of the prostration, 32nd chapter of the Quran, verse 24, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "And we made from them leaders, Imams, who guide by our command, when they were steadfast and had certainty, yaqeen, in our signs." Let us not merely state this correlation ourselves, but ground it as the works of our greatest exegetes. They confirm that this Imam is a high spiritual station of guidance, and that sabr or steadfastness and yaqeen certainty are its only prerequisites. Allama Tabatabai in Tafsir al-Mizan explains this spiritual equation with great precision. He says, "And God, exalted is He, has made two conditions for this guidance, which is the imamah or leadership. The first is steadfastness, sabr, and the second is certainty or yaqeen in the signs of God. Therefore, it is through patience and certainty that the believer attains this exalted station." The reference is in the write-up. Ayatollah Jawadi Amali in Tafsir Tasneem builds on this, explaining that sabr and yaqeen are the two wings that allow one to fly to this station, and that these Imams then become a source of sustenance for others. Ayatollah Jawadi says, God the Glorified made Imamah the reward for those who are steadfast and possess certainty. Those who, through the light of patience and certainty, attain the rank of Imamah, lead others as well to that same patience and certainty. And the reference, of course, is in the write-up. The conclusion from our scholars is undeniable, and it is the very heart of our message. The command in Surah Al-Asr is to enjoin sabr and enjoin the truth, enjoin patience and enjoin truth, which is the object of certainty or yaqeen. The formula in Surah As-Sajdah is that Imams of guidance are created from sabr and yaqeen, from patience and certainty. This is the spiritual equation for resistance. The handful of resistors in a corrupt society who are deemed as nothing by the world are in fact the Imams of guidance in waiting. By embodying the sabr and yaqeen of Surah As-Sajdah, they are fulfilling the commands of Surah Al-Asr. In doing so, as Ayatollah Jawadi Amali explained, they become the new pure source of Rizq Halal, leadership and knowledge for the rest of humanity, bringing others to that same sabr and yaqeen. This is the practical daily jihad against the Imams of fire and their Rizq Haram system of riba and lies. We enjoin the truth by rejecting their systems of exploitation and choosing Rizq Halal. And we enjoin sabr by enduring the financial loss of this choice and having the yaqeen or certainty that our true wealth is barakah with God. Our rizq, both what we consume and what we become, is our resistance. It is the ultimate expression of our purity, tazkiyah and tahara, our certainty, yaqeen, and our choice of fuel, rizq halal. Please give me a salawat and we move to the conclusion, which is titled The Journey from Vessel to Fuel.
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد.
In this third and final part of our journey into the heart of the matter, we have addressed the fuel that sustains our spiritual life. We have discovered that rizq, sustenance, is not merely food, the food we eat, but rather a vast spectrum that includes our wealth, our knowledge, and most critically, the leadership we follow. We learned from the Quran and Ahlulbayt that our sustenance becomes from one of two sources: the Imams of guidance or Rizq Halal, and the Imams of fire or Rizq Haram. Our food is our knowledge, and we must ask, from whom do we take it? We confronted the systemic poison of riba, usury, the war on God that nourishes the Imams of fire and corrupts the flesh and blood of a society, blocking our prayers. We learned that the fiqhi or legal permission of necessity to interact with this system is not a green light for complacency. Rather, it is a spiritual burden that must ignite our imagination, itself a form of rizq, to create our own pure alternative systems. Finally, we brought our entire series full circle, linking the sabr or steadfastness and yaqeen, certainty of Surah As-Sajdah, to the command in Surah Al-Asr. We learned that by embodying sabr or patience and yaqeen, certainty, the handful of resistors can become the Imams of guidance for a lost world. This concludes our three-part series, The Heart of the Matter. Part 1, we purified the vessel, the qalb, through tazkiyah, purity, and khushu, humility, born from realizing our own ontological poverty, our faqr. Part 2, we filled that pure vessel with the light of yaqeen, certainty, transforming our prayer from a mere request into a dialogue. And in Part 3, we learned to sustain that light with the proper fuel of Rizq Halal, pure sustenance, choosing Barakah or blessing over mere abundance, and the Imams of guidance over the Imams of fire. As we leave this series, let us take with us 3 final practical lessons. Number 1, audit your total consumption. For 1 week, audit not just your food, but your media. Ask, is the Imam I follow on social media an Imam of guidance or an Imam of fire? Does their food, meaning their content, make you more humble and certain, or more arrogant and anxious? Be as careful with your intellectual sustenance as you are with your physical sustenance. Secondly, treat riba as spiritual poison. Reframe your relationship with the interest-based economy. If you are forced by darura, by necessity, to interact with it, treat it as eating carrion, eating al-mayyit, eating like a carcass. Heat it. Feel the spiritual burden of it. And then use the rizq of your imagination to find solutions. Start a community fund. Support halal co-ops. Innovate. Do not be complacent. And thirdly, invest in the rizq that grows. Follow the advice of Imam Ali. Dedicate more of your time and wealth to seeking the rizq that increases when you spend it. That being, of course, knowledge, wisdom, and truth. And less to the rizq that diminishes, such as material possessions and such things. This is the only true investment, and it is the only true wealth. This journey through purity, certainty, and sustenance was not just an academic exercise. It was in its entirety a preparation. It was the adab, or the etiquette, required before we can truly begin to understand our souls. We have purified the vessel, we have filled it with light and secured its fuel. Now, and only now, are we prepared to begin the deep Gnostic journey into the very psychology of the human spirit. Join us, inshallah, in the next series, which will be in maybe 4 weeks, on 40 hadith. Join us in the next series within this overarching Art of Supplication series as we take our first step into the monumental works of the greatest mujaddid of our time, Imam Khomeini, may God rest his pure soul. As I said, God willing, we will begin with a series on 40 hadith. However, it should be clear that this will be a lengthy series, with each hadith spanning multiple sessions in this same 3-point sermon format. We ask him to grant us tawfiq, strength, and insight to even begin to scratch the surface of these extremely profound works. And we rely entirely on him, knowing that from him is all ability and he has authority over all things. Please give me a salawat, and we have the Whisper Beneath the Throne, which this evening is titled A Ballad for the Starving Heart.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, ala Muhammad.
In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. O God, send your blessings upon Muhammad, the mercy to the worlds, and upon his pure and radiant family, the ark of our salvation. My God, I am the destitute one who forgot his poverty and put on the filthy garment of arrogance. I am the vessel that you created to be pure, but I have stained it with the impurity of my own self-admiration. I am the starving guest invited to your feast who has been secretly eating the poison of my own ego. My Lord, I stand at your door, my garments filthy, my heart heavy, my hands empty. Wash me, O you who are Al-Quddus, the All-Holy. Wash me with the tears of my repentance and the downpour of your forgiveness. My God, I have been heedless, my certainty has wavered, my prayer has been a request, not a dialogue. My Master, I have eaten poison. I have looked, as you commanded, at my food, and I am terrified. I have nourished my soul from the hands of the Imams of fire. I have consumed the rizq of their arrogance, their falsehoods, their division. I have opened my heart to their whispers, and they have extinguished your light. My God, my food is my knowledge. So, by the truth of Muhammad and the family of Muhammad, grant me the rizq of Furqan, the criterion. Grant me to see the light. Grant me the light to see. Grant me the yaqeen or certainty to distinguish the Imams of guidance who speak your words from the Imams of fire who twist your words. Give me the strength to turn away from his table, even if it is laden with what the world calls success. Let me starve, my God, rather than eat the sustenance of the fire. Feed me from the hands of the true Imams, the Ahlulbayt, whose knowledge is your blessing, whose love is your path, and whose sustenance is your light. My Lord, I look at the world and I see the work of these Imams of fire. I see their poison in the smoke over Gaza, in the silence over Sudan, and in the wounds of Yemen and Lebanon. I see them in the West, feeding their own populations the evil of Riba or Usury, using their taxes for genocide against their will, killing their children in the name of convenience and modernity, and wishing their elders death in the name of mercy, and silencing the pure-hearted who protest with the lying label of terrorism. My God, the world screams in despair. It tells me I am lost, but my certainty, my yaqeen is in you. My certainty is not in my own deeds, for they are nothing. My certainty is in your mercy, which is everything. My certainty is in the sabr, or the patience of the father in Gaza, who, holding his martyred child, looks to the sky and says, "O God, I am content." My certainty is in the steadfastness of Yemen, the confidence of Lebanon, and the resilience of the oppressed. That is my Rizq Halal. That is my Imam of guidance. O you, the ultimate Raziq, ultimate provider, the sustainer of all things, hasten the return of our true Imam of guidance, your proof, your command, the awaited one, Imam al-Mahdi. May our souls be his ransom, and may you truly hasten his return. But my God, oh my God, before you hasten his return, hasten our readiness. Do not let us be a burden to him. Do not let us be the complacent ones. By the truth of this series, the work that we have done, grant us the rizq of your holy imagination. Grant us the creative sabr or patience to build the halal systems he needs, to purify our hearts to be his vessels, so become the hands that clear his path, so that when he comes, he finds a people nourished by purity, illuminated by certainty, and strengthened by your pure sustenance. My God, I have pledged to you, let this not be mere words. Let this be the ballad of my entire life. By your mercy, O you, the most merciful of the merciful. Amen, O Lord, sustainer of the universes. Amen, O most merciful of the merciful. Wa akhiru da'wani alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi